My parents left me a dilapidated old house on barren land in a remote corner of New Mexico, while my younger brother Marcus inherited their well-maintained estate in Denver, Colorado. My wife Sarah called me spineless, lacking the backbone to stand up to Marcus, and she threw me out, saying I could only return when I'd fought for what was rightfully mine. I drove to New Mexico, my heart heavy with hurt and curiosity, never expecting that this house would change my entire life. Hello, my name is Daniel Rivera. I'm 45 years old and I work as an accountant at a mid-size firm in Denver, Colorado. My life, if I had to describe it, is like a still pond, calm, predictable, but never truly alive. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys talking about himself. But since you're here, I'll try to help you understand who I am and why I'm standing in front of this crumbling adobe house, holding a set of tarnished keys, my heart swirling with mixed emotions. I grew up in Denver in a middle-class neighborhood with identical houses, manicured lawns, and white picket fences. My parents, Robert and Elena Rivera, were hard-working people. My father was a construction foreman and my mother was a high school Spanish teacher. They loved us, Marcus and me, but it wasn't a demonstrative kind of love. They taught us to be respectful, to compromise, and to always put family first. But there was always something missing, a piece I couldn't quite name. My parents rarely spoke about our family's roots. I only knew fragments gleaned from half-told stories, that my great-grandfather was part of the Pueblo tribe, Native Americans who had lived in the Southwest for centuries. My grandfather Miguel was the last in our family to hold any real connection to that culture, but he passed away when I was too young to remember. My father, perhaps wanting us to assimilate into city life, never spoke much about my grandfather or our Pueblo heritage. What little I knew came from vague stories, that my great-grandfather was a skilled potter, that my grandfather had worked on a ranch near Taos, and that our family had left their ancestral lands to start anew in Colorado. I don't blame my parents. They just wanted us to have an easier life, free from the label of different, in a city where Native Americans often faced prejudice. But sometimes when I looked in the mirror and saw my dark eyes and bronze skin, I wondered, who am I really? Deep down, a part of me yearned to connect with those roots, but I didn't know where to start. Marcus, my younger brother, was different. 3 years my junior, he was always the golden child. Tall, charismatic, with a smile that could charm anyone. Marcus was ambitious, sharp, and unafraid to take what he wanted. When we were kids, he always got the bigger portion, the better gifts, and most of our parents' attention. I wasn't jealous, or at least I told myself I wasn't. I was the older brother, and older brothers are supposed to step aside. But sometimes I wondered if I was too passive, as Sarah often said. Sarah. Just mentioning her name makes my chest tighten. We met 12 years ago at a charity fundraiser. She was the daughter of a wealthy family from Boulder, a smart-driven woman with piercing blue eyes and perfectly styled auburn hair. Sarah was drawn to my stability, or so she said. "You're different from other men," she told me. "You're reliable, steady." I fell for her immediately, loving how she made everything around her seem more vibrant. We married after 2 years of dating, and her parents gifted us a townhouse in Cherry Creek, an upscale Denver neighborhood. It was a gift I was grateful for, but one that always made me feel indebted. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable. Sarah worked in commercial real estate, always busy with deals and networking events. I, on the other hand, was content with my desk job. I liked the predictability of numbers, of balanced ledgers. But Sarah wanted more. She wanted me to climb the ladder to become the powerful man she envisioned. "Daniel, you can't keep letting people walk all over you," she'd say, her voice laced with frustration. "You let Marcus manipulate you. You let your colleagues take credit for your work. Are you going to live your whole life in the shadows?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to compete, didn't want to become a version of Marcus. But each of Sarah's words cut deep, making me doubt myself. Was I really weak? Had I let life pass me by without fighting for anything? Everything changed one April afternoon when I got a call from the hospital. My parents had died in a multi-car pileup on I-25. A semi-truck had jackknifed in the rain, causing a chain reaction. I don't remember how I drove to the hospital, only that when I arrived, I collapsed in the sterile hallway, tears streaming uncontrollably. Marcus arrived after me, outwardly composed, but I saw his jaw clench as he signed the paperwork. The funeral was heavy with grief. Marcus and I barely spoke, exchanging only brief words about arrangements and flowers. Sarah stayed by my side, her hand in mine, but I sensed a distance in her eyes. Maybe she was disappointed that I wasn't showing the strength she expected. Maybe she thought I should step up, prove I was the older brother. A week later, my parents' lawyer called us in to read their will. I didn't expect much. My parents weren't wealthy, and I assumed their assets would be split evenly. But when the lawyer read the will, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. Robert and Elena Rivera leave their house in Denver, Colorado, along with all personal assets to their younger son, Marcus Rivera, the lawyer said in a measured tone. To Daniel Rivera, they leave a property in Rio Arriba County, New Mexico, along with all its contents. I was stunned. The Denver house was where Marcus and I had grown up, filled with memories of our parents. It was well-maintained, comfortable, worth at least $800,000 in today's market. The New Mexico property, I didn't even know it existed. My parents had never mentioned it, and I only vaguely recalled that my grandfather had lived somewhere in the high desert. Marcus looked at me, a cryptic smile playing at his lips. "Guess Mom and Dad knew you always liked the quiet life," he said, half joking, half serious. I didn't respond, just nodded, trying to hide the sense of injustice swelling inside me. Sarah, on the other hand, couldn't contain her anger. On the drive home, she exploded. "You're okay with this, Daniel. Some rundown shack in the middle of nowhere while Marcus gets the entire estate. You're the older brother and you let your little brother steal your inheritance like that." "It was their wish," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want this." "Their wish." She let out a bitter laugh. "Your parents clearly thought nothing of you, and you don't even bother to fight. You're spineless, Daniel. You've always been spineless." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to argue, to say I didn't need the house, that I just wanted to keep peace with Marcus, but I couldn't say anything. Maybe deep down I was afraid she was right. That night, Sarah threw me out. She said she couldn't live with a man who didn't stand up for himself. "Go, Daniel," she said, pointing to the door. "Go to that worthless property of yours in New Mexico. Don't come back until you do something to prove you're a man." I didn't argue. I packed a few clothes, grabbed my car keys, and drove off into the night. I didn't know if I was running away or searching for something, but by morning I was on the highway heading toward New Mexico, the tarnished keys the lawyer had given me weighing heavily in my pocket. The New Mexico property, according to the paperwork, was near a small town called Tierra Amarilla, nestled in the high desert among mesas and endless sky. I'd never been there, but as I drove along the winding roads, I felt something strange, like I was returning to a place I'd never left. Or maybe I was just so tired, so hurt, that my imagination was playing tricks on me. When I arrived, dusk was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house stood before me, a crumbling adobe structure silhouetted against the fading light. It was smaller than I'd imagined, with cracked walls, a partially collapsed roof, and desert plants growing through the windows. But instead of feeling disappointed, I felt curious. There was something about this house, a secret waiting to be uncovered. I stepped out of the car, clutching the keys tightly. A dry wind blew through, carrying the scent of sage and earth. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. This was my inheritance, I thought, and whatever it was, I was determined to uncover the truth. I stepped forward, each step crunching the gravel beneath my boots. The bundle of keys in my hand felt heavy, ancient, as if they carried the weight of forgotten stories. The front door, made of weathered wood, groaned as I inserted the key into the lock. I had to shoulder it open, and a wave of dry, dusty air hit me the smell of clay and time. Inside, the last rays of sunset filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating cracked tile floors. An old wooden table sat abandoned in the middle of the room next to a kiva fireplace covered in dust. There wasn't a single sign of recent life, no lights, no pictures, no trace of a family that once lived here. But instead of feeling disappointed, I felt a strange pull. This house was whispering to me as if it knew I hadn't come just to look, but to search. I set my duffel bag down and pulled out the flashlight I'd brought from Denver. Its pale beam swept across the room, revealing hidden corners. The house wasn't large, just a living area, a small kitchen and a hallway leading to a few other rooms. I walked through each one, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The main bedroom was empty, save for an old iron bed frame and a moth-eaten blanket. Another room seemed to be for storage, with a few rotting wooden crates scattered about. But when I pushed open the last door in the hallway, my heart began to race. This door was different. It was made of solid mesquite wood, adorned with intricate carvings, images of thunderbirds and cornstalks flowing patterns like water. I'd never seen anything like it in Denver. My hands trembled as I tried the keys in the lock, but none of them fit. I tried every key in the bundle, but the door wouldn't budge. A mix of frustration and curiosity drove me to keep going. I swept the flashlight around the door and noticed a small gap at the bottom corner, a hidden entrance, perhaps. I knelt down, touched the gap, and felt a loose wooden panel. With some effort, I pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow space. I crawled through, my heart pounding as if it might burst. Inside was a small room, no bigger than a large closet. My flashlight illuminated wooden shelves lined with objects I'd never seen before. There were pottery vessels with intricate geometric patterns, woven blankets with vibrant colors, and a ceremonial headdress with pristine eagle feathers. In the corner stood an old wooden chest carved with the image of a bear beneath stars. My breath quickened. These weren't ordinary objects. They held deeper significance, as if they were pieces of a larger story. I opened the chest carefully, as if afraid to break something precious. Inside was a leather-bound journal, thick and worn, its pages yellowed with age. I gently opened the first page, and handwritten words appeared. To those who carry the blood of the Pueblo Guard and honor. Below was my grandfather's signature, Miguel Rivera, and a date, September 22nd, 1952. A shiver ran through me. This was my family's legacy, not the crumbling house, but what it concealed. I sat on the floor, carefully turning the journal's pages. It wasn't just a diary. It was a chronicle of my family, of the Pueblo people. My grandfather wrote about my great-grandfather, a man named Jose Aguila Blanca, White Eagle in English. He described the days when the tribe lived in harmony with the land, creating pottery and performing ceremonies beneath endless skies. He wrote of the losses when the government seized their lands, forcing many to scatter. But above all, he wrote of resilience, how my great-grandfather hid these artifacts to protect them from destruction, so that one day his descendants could reclaim and continue the story of their people. I didn't realize tears were streaming down my face until they dripped onto the pages. I had never felt so close to my grandfather, my great-grandfather, or my tribe as I did in that moment. All those years growing up in Denver, I had lived as a stranger to my own roots. But now, sitting in this dusty room, I felt like I was being called by name. Not Daniel Rivera, the accountant, but Daniel, descendant of Jose Aguila Blanca, bearer of Pueblo blood. I spent the entire night examining the artifacts. Each one told a story. The eagle feather headdress my grandfather wrote was used in rain ceremonies. The pottery vessels held sacred cornmeal for blessings. A small drum covered in deerskin still produced a deep, resonant sound when I tapped it lightly. I didn't know their monetary value, but I knew they were priceless. They were history, the soul of a people I had never truly understood. The next morning, I called an old college friend, James, an anthropologist at the University of New Mexico. I briefly told him about my findings, and he agreed to drive up immediately. When James stepped into the room, his eyes widened like a child discovering treasure. Daniel, do you realize what you have here? He said, his voice trembling. These artifacts, they could be worth millions, not just materially, but for their historical and cultural significance. This is the heritage of the Pueblo people, the kind of collection museums worldwide would pay a fortune to acquire. I was stunned. Millions of dollars. That kind of money could buy back the Denver house payoff, Sarah's expensive tastes, and let me live comfortably. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I felt a deep resistance. These artifacts weren't for sale. They didn't belong in a museum behind glass or in a collector's private vault. They belonged to me, no, to my family, to the Pueblo people. James left after promising to contact a native culture expert for further assessment. I stayed in the house, continuing to read my grandfather's journal. With each page, I learned more about the struggles my family had faced. My grandfather wrote about how my father Robert chose to leave New Mexico for Colorado, hoping his children would have an easier life. But he also wrote of his pain as he watched my father drift away from Pueblo culture. Robert thinks assimilation is the only way to survive, he wrote. But I know that if we forget our roots, we lose ourselves. Those words cut deep. I thought of my parents, how they avoided talking about my grandfather or the tribe. Perhaps they feared that acknowledging the past would lead to discrimination for me and Marcus. But now I realized they were wrong. The past wasn't a burden, it was strength, identity. In the days that followed, I began fixing up the house. I swept the floors, patched holes in the roof, and cleaned the artifacts with the care one would give to sacred relics. Each day, I felt closer to my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and the ancestors I'd never met, but who now felt alive within me. I started having vivid dreams of endless mesas, the sound of drums, a man with long, braided hair standing on a cliff, gazing at the horizon. One afternoon, as I was cleaning a pottery vessel, there was a knock at the door. I startled. Tierra Amarilla was remote, and I hadn't seen anyone besides James since arriving. I opened the door to find an elderly woman, her skin weathered by sun, her silver hair tied in a traditional bun. She wore a simple dress, but her eyes were sharp, as if they could see through to my soul. "I'm Maria Montoya," she said, her voice warm but firm. "James told me about you. You're Daniel Miguel Rivera's grandson." I nodded and invited her in. Maria stepped into the secret room, and when she saw the artifacts, her eyes glistened with an emotion I couldn't quite name, pride mixed with sorrow. She touched the eagle feather headdress, her fingers gentle. "Do you know how important these are?" she asked. "They're not just objects. They're the spirits of your ancestors, of our people." Maria told me about the history of the Pueblo, about the ceremonies, the pottery traditions, and how their culture was suppressed but survived through people like my grandfather. She said my grandfather had been a keeper of culture, hiding these artifacts to prevent them from being lost forever. Miguel believed that one day someone from his line would find them, Maria said, and that someone is you. I felt a weight on my shoulders, but also a fire igniting in my heart. I wasn't just Daniel, the passive accountant. I was a descendant of warriors, artists, people who lived and died to protect their culture. But not everything was smooth. A week later, Marcus showed up. He pulled up in his BMW, striding into the house with his familiar, confident swagger. "Brother Daniel, I hear you found buried treasure," he said, his tone light but his eyes calculating. "James mentioned it to a colleague and word got to me. Those artifacts are worth a fortune." My blood boiled. "They're not for sale, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "They're our family's legacy, our people's heritage." Marcus laughed. "Heritage? Come on, don't be naive. Sell them, split the money, and you could live like a king. Hell, I'm willing to trade the Denver house for this dump if you want." His offer shook me. The Denver house filled with memories of our parents, our childhood. Part of me wanted to agree to go back to Sarah, to my old life. But as I looked at my grandfather's journal, at the eagle feather headdress, I knew I couldn't. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice firmer than ever. "They don't belong to us to sell. They belong to the people. Marcus shook his head, looking at me like I was insane. You'll regret this, Daniel, he said before leaving. You always regret your weakness. Marcus left, leaving me with a gnawing sense of unease. His offer trading the Denver house for this one, along with the priceless artifacts, was like a stone thrown into still water. Rippling thoughts I'd tried to bury. I sat in the secret room, still clutching my grandfather's leather journal, my eyes fixed on the ceremonial drum hanging on the wall. The flashlight's beam caught the painted symbols, making them seem to dance. But my mind wasn't here anymore. It was drifting back to Denver, to Sarah, to the life I once thought was enough. I stood and stepped out onto the porch. The night in Tierra Amarilla was clear and cold, the air carrying the scent of piñón and sage. The sky was ablaze with stars so bright I could see the Milky Way stretching across like a river of light. I'd never seen a sky like this in Denver, where city lights always washed everything out. Here it was pure, real, as if I stood at the center of creation. I wondered if my grandfather had ever stood here, gazing at this same sky, feeling what I felt now. Had he ever faced temptations like the ones I was grappling with? The next morning I got a call from Sarah. Her voice over the phone wasn't as harsh as it had been the last time we spoke. It was softer, almost sweet, like when we first started dating. "Daniel," she said, "I heard from Marcus about the things you found. Did you really find something valuable?" I gripped the phone tightly, my pulse quickening. "It's not treasure, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "It's a legacy. It belongs to our family, to the Pueblo people." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then gave a soft laugh. "You're always so idealistic, Daniel, but I'm more practical. If those artifacts are worth millions, like Marcus says, you could sell them. We could pay off our debts, buy a house in Aspen, travel the world. Don't you want that life? A life where we don't have to worry anymore?" Her words painted a picture I'd once dreamed of: a bigger house, European vacations, respect from colleagues and family. But at the same time, I felt a deep resistance. These artifacts weren't lottery tickets. They were history. The soul of my ancestors. Selling them would mean betraying not just my grandfather, but myself. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you don't understand. These things aren't for sale. They mean more than money." She sighed, her tone sharpening. "You're still the same Daniel, always romanticizing everything. You think those old relics will change anything. They won't pay bills. They won't bring happiness. You're living in a fantasy, and I'm tired of waiting for you to wake up." I wanted to argue, to tell her I'd found happiness, not in money, but in connecting with my roots. But I stayed silent, maybe because I knew, no matter what I said, Sarah wouldn't understand. She didn't see what I saw, didn't hear what I heard, in the wind whispering through the juniper trees. "I'm coming to New Mexico," she said before hanging up. "I want to talk face to face. You can't keep running away forever." I stared at the darkened phone screen, feeling a storm approaching. Sarah always had a way of shaking me, making me doubt myself, but this time I was determined not to let that happen. I returned to the secret room, sitting before the wooden chest. I opened my grandfather's journal again, seeking strength in his words. He wrote of a time when my great-grandfather, José Aguila Blanca, was tempted by a trader who promised gold for the tribe's sacred items. He refused, even though the tribe was struggling. "Money can buy comfort today," my grandfather wrote, "but only spiritual wealth sustains us through generations." Those words were like a flame dispelling the darkness in my heart. I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for those who fought to preserve this legacy. Sarah arrived 3 days later on a windy afternoon. She wore designer jeans and a leather jacket, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the desert wind. Stepping into the house, she wrinkled her nose at the adobe walls and dirt floor. "You're really living like this, Daniel?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't a home, it's ruins." I didn't respond, just led her to the secret room. When she saw the artifacts, her eyes lit up. not with reverence but with calculation. She touched a pottery vessel, her fingers tracing the patterns as if appraising it. "These are exquisite," she said. "Marcus was right. I know an auction house in New York. We could make millions." "Sarah," I interrupted, my voice firm, "they're not for sale." She turned, her smile fading. "Are you serious? You're going to keep them here in this falling apart house to rot with you? Daniel, this is our chance to change everything. Your life. Our life." "Maybe," I said, looking her in the eye, "but not mine. I found my purpose. These artifacts aren't just objects. They're the history of my family, of the Pueblo people. I have a responsibility to protect them." Sarah shook her head, stepping closer and placing a hand on my arm. "You've changed, Daniel," she said, her voice softer. "I don't recognize you anymore, but I still want us to work. Sell them and we can start over. I'll forgive everything, how you let Marcus walk over you, how you disappointed me. We could be happy." Her words were like a blade, but this time they didn't sway me. I gently removed her hand, feeling a strength I'd never known. "Sarah, I don't need your forgiveness," I said. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just doing what's right. If you can't accept that, then maybe we don't belong together." She stared at me, her eyes glistening with tears. But I saw it wasn't love in them. It was defeat. "You'll regret this, Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "You'll be alone and you'll regret it." She turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the room with the artifacts like silent witnesses. I didn't regret it. For the first time in my life, I felt I'd stood firm against temptation, against pressure. I was no longer the weak Daniel always yielding to keep the peace. I was Daniel, descendant of José Aguila Blanca, who chose to protect his legacy. But the temptations didn't stop. A few days later, a stranger appeared at my door. He introduced himself as a representative of a private museum in Santa Fe, having heard about the artifacts through mutual contacts, likely Marcus. He offered to buy the entire collection for $2.5 million, promising to display them with proper respect. "Mr. Rivera, this is an opportunity for these items to be appreciated by the world," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "We'll preserve them for future generations." I looked at him, anger rising. "Preserve them?" I asked, my voice cold. "You think putting them behind glass in a museum is preservation? They belong to the Pueblo people, to those who understand their spiritual significance. You can't buy their soul." The man gave a thin smile and shrugged. "I'm simply making an offer, Mr. Rivera. If you change your mind, here's my card." He left, but his visit left me uneasy. I knew there would be others, more offers, more pressure. I had to be stronger than ever. After that encounter, I knew I couldn't keep the artifacts locked away forever. They needed to be protected, but not by hiding them, by letting them live through education, ceremony, and community. The idea of a cultural center began to take shape in my mind. Not a sterile museum, but a living place where the Pueblo and others could learn, connect, and take pride in their heritage. I started by reaching out to Maria Montoya. She came to the house one early morning, bringing traditional fry bread and herbal tea. I shared my vision, and she nodded, her eyes bright. "You're on the sacred path, Daniel," she said. "Miguel would be proud, but this isn't something you can do alone. You need the community." Maria introduced me to others in the Pueblo community around northern New Mexico. I met Carlos Redhawk, a traditional drummer, and Rosa Morningstar, a master potter who still used ancient techniques. They welcomed me not as an outsider trying to reclaim a heritage, but as family returning from a long journey. I felt a connection I'd never experienced. Not with Sarah, not with Marcus, but with people who shared my blood, my history. Rosa and Carlos helped me plan the cultural center. We decided to restore the adobe house, turning it into a space to display the artifacts, hold classes on Pueblo pottery, drumming, and ceremonies. I used my savings to buy materials, and the community pitched in with labor. During those days, the house came alive. We replastered the walls, repaired the roof, and built an outdoor ramada for gatherings. But not everyone supported the idea. One evening while working with Rosa, I learned that Marcus had contacted a real estate developer trying to sell the property without my consent. I was furious, but Maria urged me to stay centered. "Your brother is blinded by greed," she said, "but you don't have to walk that path. Focus on your purpose." I hired a lawyer in Santa Fe to block Marcus, and eventually secured full legal ownership of the property. It was a small victory, but it made me feel stronger. I was no longer afraid to confront Marcus, Sarah, or anyone else who tried to take what I was meant to protect. One summer morning, the cultural center officially opened. We held a traditional ceremony with Carlos's drumming echoing across the mesas and the smoke from burning sage rising to the sky. Maria led the blessing, and I stood beside her wearing a shirt Rosa had woven for me, my heart full. Dozens of people attended from the Pueblo community, neighboring tribes, and curious locals interested in native culture. I stood before the crowd holding a microphone, and for the first time shared my story. I spoke of my journey from Denver to Tierra Amarilla, of finding the artifacts, and how they helped me understand who I truly was. "I used to think I was weak," I said, my voice catching. "But now I know strength doesn't come from money or power. It comes from knowing where you belong and fighting to protect it." The crowd applauded, and I saw tears in Rosa's eyes. After the ceremony, a young boy approached me holding a small piece of pottery he'd made. "Thank you, Mr. Daniel," he said. "I never thought being Pueblo was special, but today I do." His words were a gift, confirming that I'd done the right thing. The cultural center wasn't just a place to preserve artifacts. It was a place to nurture pride, hope, and connection. I stood there amid the laughter and drumming, the scent of sage lingering in the air, and felt a peace I'd never known. But deep down, I knew my journey wasn't over. This house, these artifacts had helped me find my roots, but more importantly, they'd helped me find myself. I, Daniel Rivera, once called spineless, once living a life of compromise, now stood at a new crossroads. Not because I'd become someone else, but because I'd embraced who I truly was. A man of Pueblo blood with a responsibility to protect my ancestors' legacy and a heart yearning for meaning. In the weeks following the center's opening, I was busier than ever. Each morning I woke with the sunrise, brewed strong coffee with a hint of cinnamon, something Rosa had taught me, and got to work. Some days I worked with Rosa cataloging artifacts and recording their stories as told by Maria and other elders. Other days I sat with Carlos learning traditional songs, my voice cracking as I tried to match his deep, resonant tones. I was still clumsy, mispronouncing Karasan words and making everyone laugh. But I wasn't embarrassed. Each small step brought me closer to my heritage. Yet I didn't always feel strong. Some nights when the center was quiet, I'd sit alone in the secret room staring at my grandfather's journal, wondering if I was truly capable of carrying this forward. The pressure came not just from outside, from Marcus, Sarah, or the museum representatives, but from within. I feared failing this legacy, feared I wasn't worthy of my grandfather's trust or the Pueblo community's faith. One evening, as I was polishing the ceremonial drum, Maria walked in. She said nothing, just sat on the old wooden bench lighting a bundle of sage. The smoke curled through the air, and finally she looked at me. "You're troubled," she said, her voice gentle. I sighed, setting the drum down carefully. "I don't know if I'm doing this right, Maria. I want to protect these things, to make this center meaningful, but I'm scared I'm not enough. I didn't grow up Pueblo. I'm just an accountant from Denver who stumbled upon his roots." Maria smiled, the kind of smile that held lifetimes of wisdom. "You think José Aguila Blanca, your great-grandfather, was never afraid?" she asked. "He faced soldiers knowing he couldn't win, yet stood for his people. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Daniel. Courage is doing what's sacred even when your knees shake." Her words were like morning light breaking through clouds. I realized this journey wasn't about becoming perfect, but about having the courage to keep walking even when I didn't know the destination. Maria handed me a small turquoise pendant on a leather cord. "Wear this," she said. "It'll remind you that you're not walking alone. Your ancestors walk with you." I put on the pendant, feeling the cool stone against my chest. From that night on, whenever doubt crept in, I'd touch the turquoise and feel my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and Maria standing behind me. My journey of self-discovery didn't just happen in the house or the cultural center. It unfolded in small moments in the lessons the Pueblo community taught me. One day, Rosa invited me to her home, where she was teaching a group of children traditional pottery. I sat there watching their small hands shape the clay, creating patterns passed down through generations. Rosa explained the meaning of each design: the step pattern for clouds, bringing rain; the spiral for life's journey, the bear paw for strength and healing. I listened, feeling like I too was learning from the beginning, like a child. "Mr. Daniel, you try," called out a girl named Sophia, her eyes bright with mischief. I laughed, shaking my head, but Rosa pushed me toward the wheel. "Don't be shy," she said. "Everything begins with the first touch." I sat at the wheel, my hands clumsy with the clay, creating a lopsided vessel that made the children giggle. But when I finished that small, imperfect piece, I felt a strange joy. Not because I'd done well, but because I dared to try. In that moment, I realized this was the strength I'd always lacked, not the strength to compete or dominate, but the strength to learn, to grow, to not fear being imperfect. But every path has obstacles. One morning, as I prepared for a pottery workshop, I received a certified letter from Marcus's attorney. He was suing me, claiming joint ownership of the property, arguing that our parents' will was ambiguous. The letter hit like a thunderbolt, leaving me shaken. I'd thought my battle with Marcus was over after securing legal ownership. I was wrong. Marcus didn't just want money, he wanted to prove I wasn't worthy, that I'd always be the loser. I called Maria, and she came immediately. We sat on the portal looking at the distant mountains, and I poured out everything. "I'm tired, Maria," I said, my voice heavy. "I just want to do what's right. But why is everything so hard? Marcus, Sarah, the people trying to buy the artifacts. It feels like the whole world is against me." Maria was quiet, then pointed to the sky where a red-tailed hawk was circling. "See that hawk?" she asked. "It flies high, but not because there's no wind against it. It flies high because it knows how to use the wind to lift itself. Your challenges, Daniel, are that wind. Don't let them ground you. Use them to soar." Her words gave me a new perspective. Marcus, Sarah, the difficulties, they weren't enemies, but teachers. I decided to face Marcus not with anger, but with resolve. I hired a skilled attorney from Albuquerque, and we prepared for the legal battle. Meanwhile, I kept working at the center, refusing to let the lawsuits slow me down. Each day, I felt stronger, not because I was winning, but because I knew I was fighting for what was sacred. The trial took place in Santa Fe, a 2-hour drive from Tierra Amarilla. I walked into the courtroom facing Marcus for the first time since his visit to the house. He looked polished, confident, but I saw something hollow in his eyes, the emptiness of someone chasing only material gain. When called to testify, I told my story without holding back. I spoke of my journey to New Mexico, the artifacts, the cultural center, and why I couldn't let them fall into the hands of those who saw only dollar signs. "I'm not doing this for myself," I said, looking at the judge. "I'm doing this for my family, for the Pueblo people, for those who fought to keep this legacy alive." Marcus, in contrast, spoke only of property values and the artifact's monetary worth, insisting he deserved a share. But I saw the judge, an older Hispanic woman, with knowing eyes, unmoved by his arguments. In the end, she ruled that the property and its contents belonged solely to me, citing the clarity of our parents' will and my demonstrated commitment to preserving the cultural heritage. As we left the courtroom, Marcus looked at me but said nothing. I wanted to tell him I wasn't keeping the property to spite him, that I still loved him as a brother, but I knew, at least for now, Marcus wasn't ready to hear it. I simply nodded and walked out, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Back in Tierra Amarilla, I held a small feast to thank the community for their support. We built a fire under the stars, shared traditional foods, and Carlos led us in songs. I stood before everyone, no longer the timid man who'd arrived months ago with tarnished keys. I was Daniel Rivera, a man who'd found inner strength not through conquest, but through the courage to live authentically. I began writing a book chronicling my story and my family's based on my grandfather's journal. I wanted future generations' children like Sophia, like the boy who'd thanked me, to know they carried a precious heritage. I also immersed myself deeper in Pueblo culture, participating in ceremonies and even attempting traditional hunting, though I was still a novice who made Carlos laugh until tears streamed down his face. My happiness now came not from what I owned, but from what I could give. Each time a child learned to shape clay, each time the drum sounded at a ceremony, I felt I was honoring my ancestors not with money, but with love and dedication. One evening, standing on the portal gazing at the star-filled sky, I felt my grandfather's presence. I touched the turquoise pendant Maria had given me and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." The wind blew through, carrying the scent of sage and piñón, and I knew that no matter how difficult this journey, I would never walk alone. I was no longer the weak Daniel, always compromising. I was Daniel, descendant of José Águila Blanca, who found purpose in protecting his ancestors' legacy. And in my heart, for the first time, I was truly proud of my Pueblo heritage.